All right, setting it up in YouTube. Hey, we're live.
Awesome. I've got it on my screen too. Okay, yeah, now it shows up as live. Awesome.
Okay, so I actually just also muted myself there.
Yeah, let me do that.
Right.
Just make sure that we don't have like feedback.
That's right. So we're going to be able to hear each other talking. So that's why I have my headphones in, is so that it doesn't loop through. People can hear this. I know that. Let's see. We got some text messages going on here. All right. Awesome.
Well, we've got one person in the chat already.
All right. Let's see what's going on there. Hello. All right. And we still have 2 more minutes, of course, but that's good. Let me make sure I've got what we need live over here as well. All right. That's interesting. Let's see. Shrink that down. Good. I haven't done a YouTube live in such a long time. I'm like, how do I even do this anymore? I have to jump in here and figure this out as we speak. So folks, as you're listening to Beth and me figure out how to YouTube live again, it's been so long. Just make fun of us, that kind of thing. Drop a hey in the chat and then tell us where you're from. Looks like we got a few people watching right now. We'd love to know where you're from, where you're tuning in from. And if you want, you could toss in questions about AP Lang. Doesn't mean we'll get to it today, but we're going to try. But there are things that we're going to focus on as well. And we're going to focus on reading strategies today. But we will, we have to just work out a couple of kinks while we wait for people to sign on. So just tell us where you're from, give us a little hey. And if you're like, I can't put anything in the chat, the reason why is because in order to be able to put things in the chat, you have to be a subscriber. And the reason why we did that is because a few years ago when we let anybody just say anything, Beth, you remember having to deal with the ridiculous nonsense that was happening? I was just like, yeah, we're gonna deal with that. Not tonight.
Yes, absolutely. Here, I'll drop a link to my channel as well, even though we're on yours. I would not hesitate to get some subscribers as well, because I'm going live on Sundays, but it's different when you do 2 people. It's a lot more different.
Oh, I completely agree. Don't worry, I was gonna give you that plug when we first started, right around the top of the hour.
Oh, we got somebody from Maryland. Okay.
Awesome. All right. Well, you all take care. Beth, why don't you watch the chat for just a couple minutes while I figure out something I got to figure out on this side here, and then I will. Then we'll get going. Okay.
All right. Awesome.
All right. Let's see what I can do here.
All right. We got somebody from Raleigh, North Carolina. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. We're going to be talking about reading strategies tonight, specifically for the multiple choice, but also rhetorical analysis. So be thinking of some questions that you might have for that. We're going to try to answer as many as we can, but also give you some valuable tips as well. And just a reminder, this is the first of 4 sessions that we have. So we're going to be covering a different topic each time. That way we can cover everything from multiple choice to the FRQs to help you get ready for the exam.
And while you are all waiting around and we're waiting for people to sign in, by all means, please tell us where you're from, put some questions in there. Beth will be monitoring that right now. I'm just trying to set up something super quick.
We got people from Michigan, Alabama, New York. AP Lang period 6, nice.
Great. And let's see, I need one other thing. Try to find one more element and then we can get this show on the road. And I can't find what I'm looking for. And it's unfortunate, but we're going to get there. Promise. All right. Oh, there we go. All right. Almost ready. Got it. Good. And we need this. I'm going to drop a subscribe link to you right down in the description, Beth. That's what I'm trying to do. So in the video description, we're going to put that subscribe link to Coach Hallwrites. Coach Hallwrites. Check out code.
Hopefully I did the right one earlier in the chat. We got people from Iowa, South Carolina. No one from our states yet, though. I don't see anyone from Massachusetts or Arkansas.
That's, you know what? You can't be a prophet in your own land. That's the problem here. Because if you are a prophet in your own land, they will throw you down the well and you'll be weeping there like Jeremiah. That is why. All right. Super cool. Got this going right here. Finally, please forgive me for that nice delay. All right. So we got Lang here and we got Iowa AP teacher, hoping that the students are logging in. Hopefully you gave them extra credit. A lot of times the extra credit seems to help here, but this is also early in the test season. We've got about 70 people in. Good. And I just so everybody knows there is a little bit of a delay. So Beth and I are probably talking about, I don't know, 15 to 20 seconds ahead of you. So we see the chat, but that doesn't mean that necessarily we're going to get to this right away. Please also know that the best way that you could actually help Beth and me out is just going to our channels and pressing subscribe. And the reason why is because that helps get our information out to more people. So we can give you the best tips and whatnot that we possibly could ever give you. And also when you tell your friends like, oh, hey, check out Coach Hall Writes. Hey, check out Garden of English. Those kind of little shout outs help because our friends trust one another, or at least they're supposed to. I'm going to actually drop Coach Hall's channel right in the chat right here. So please make sure you click on that and go give her a subscription. Hello to Lindy from Houston. Oh, hey, look at that. Beth.
Yeah,
Lindy
Lindy.
That's nice to kind of like meet back up with folks, you know. That's a great thing. And then we'll try to get some shout outs here too. If anybody has a awesome AP Lang teacher that you want Beth or me to give a shout out to, please put that Lang teacher in there and we'll try to see if we can't catch that. That will be awesome. But all right, it is 7:04. Coach Hall and I will probably spend about an hour, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more, talking about some reading strategies here as we talk about how can we help you not only on your rhetorical analysis essay itself, that's where we'll start, but also just the idea of reading. What are things that you could practice reading now while you read, particularly nonfiction, both in class and out of class, that can help build your skills so that you can do really well on the multiple choice on exam day, and really well on reading your rhetorical analysis. But the truth is that if you're reading really well, if you're reading nonfiction really well, you can also read your sources better too. Okay. Beth, do you mind if I do a little bit of AP exam math for kids before we start talking? Or are you like, no, Tim, I got something I have to say right now?
No, go ahead.
Okay, well, first of all, we got a shout out to Ms. Sherry here because Ms. Sherry is well loved. So Ms. Sherry, if you're watching, your kids absolutely love and adore you. And so if you see anybody else, Beth, while I'm talking, by all means, please shout that out. But I want to just give you all some AP math here real quick. And the reason why is this: when it comes to multiple choice, the multiple choice are hard. I can't tell you how many times. The last time I took an AP Lang multiple choice, it was when they were still doing 55 questions. So this was probably in 2013. But out of those 55 questions, I think I got 5 or 6 of them wrong. So please note, like I've been teaching this for many years, and I actually have a rhetoric degree, and I still got like 5 or 6 wrong. And so these are hard questions. On top of that, I know someone else who has a doctorate in rhetoric who took an AP Lang exam. And the person actually told me, I won't even tell you how many I got wrong. And the reason why is because it was embarrassing to me. And that person had a doctorate. So these questions can be very, very hard. Now, with that being said, I want to just point out the scoring on the exam goes like this. You obviously earn a score of a 1 through 5, and a 5 being the highest score you can get on the exam, and a 1 being the lowest score you can get on the exam. But a qualifying score is a score of a 3. Now, not every school or every university will take a 3 as a qualifying score, but a 3 is considered a qualifying score. And to get a 3, I just want to put this in perspective for you all, as y'all are like, multiple choice is hard, because it is. If you write a 1, 3, 0 for each of your essays, that's a 1 for your thesis point, a 3 for evidence and commentary, and you don't get the sophistication point. If you can do that for all 3 of your essays, which I promise you that you all can do, especially if you watch Coach Hall Writes videos and you watch Garden of English videos, you need to get between 16 and 19 multiple choice correct to get a qualifying score of a 3. So I want you to think about that. 45 questions. If you get between 16 and 19 correct, and you get 1 3 zeros on all of your essays, you can get a qualifying score of a 3 on your exam. That is actually pretty manageable. So I wanted to make sure that we went over that first. Now you might be like, why are you saying 16 to 19? I'm going to tell you why. Because with the way that the test scoring is normed, sometimes the margin of error does fluctuate, or the statistics fluctuate. But the last time they produced a scoring guide for students, when I did my math, it was 16 multiple choice and 1 3 zeros, which I think is certainly doable for all of you. Sorry, Beth, for talking so much. What do you have to say? Any shout outs, anything good like that?
Well, we've got a shout out for Doc in the chat, and we've got lots of people checking in for their respective AP Lang periods. But I agree with you. I think it's helpful for students to know that you don't necessarily need as high of a multiple choice score as you might think. I tell my students, just to be safe, I like them to try to shoot for like 23 out of 45.
Completely agree.
Because I want them to, be getting close to half if they can. But I think it's refreshing to know it's still possible with potentially slightly lower score. And then the 1 3 0 on the essays, the more I teach, the more I'm like, this is totally doable. For that. So I think that's helpful, because right now is around the time that students start to not necessarily panic, but they're really starting to think about, okay, what do I need to do to get a certain score that I want for my particular college and things like that.
Right. And so that's one thing that you do want to look at, Beth. I appreciate you bringing that up. Look at your college and see what the score is that they want. Now, because most students, do they take AP Lang junior year at your school?
Yes.
Okay. So they take it senior year where I work. However, please note, folks, that if you're taking AP Lang junior year, you can retake your Lang exam next year too if you don't get the score that you want. I was tutoring a kid a few years ago, and he got a qualifying score the first time around, but he didn't get the score that he wanted for his university. And so sure enough, he retook it, and then he got that higher score the next year. So you are allowed to retake. Okay. So that is that. Shout out to period 6 and period 3 and period 2, wherever your respective period 6, 3, and 2 are, by the way. So that is that. But all right, Beth, let's actually start with some reading strategies. What are some things that you give kids and tell to kids? And if there's anything you want to share on your screen, I'm going to open that sharing settings right now. But you could share things if you want to. But otherwise, tell us what your kids struggle with. And then what do we do? What do we do in Coach Hall's classroom?
Okay, so one of the things that my students have noticed, many of them prefer the writing questions over the reading questions. And I think that matters because we want to start to be thinking about how to be strategic on the test. So for many of my students, it helps them to recognize that at least for we're taking the paper exam, they don't have to work through the passages or the questions in order. And so some of them like to start with the writing questions. Some of them prefer to start with the reading, but also because each question is worth 1 point each, I tell them, we don't want to get stuck on one question, because I have some students who they're like, I don't want to move on until I'm convinced I'm right. And I'm like, okay, but you have 5 more questions that you could be answering in this amount of time. So we don't want to necessarily linger too long on any one particular question, because they're all literally 1 point each. There's 45 questions. It's 45% of your composite. So I think that can be helpful too, is to recognize that we don't want to get hung up on a particular question. And as you're working through the test, you can kind of play to your strengths in that regard. And some ways to do that would be process of elimination. I know that's not groundbreaking or new, but and we can talk about this in more detail, but usually there's 2 or even 3 answer choices that students can eliminate. And then if you can zero in on 2, then that helps. I always have students tell me, I always pick the wrong one though, or they have the right one and then they talk themselves out of it. And then when we're going over the answers, they're like, oh, I should have stuck with my gut instinct and stuff. But so yeah, process of elimination really helps.
I would say, in narrowing it down to those 2, right? There are some typical qualities of lead distractors for both the writing and the reading multiple choice. And I'll go over those qualities in a little bit, but you're absolutely right. That starting with that process of elimination, kids take multiple choice exams all the time, but now if we can take that and then say, hey, here are the qualities of lead distractors most often, we can really help kids really narrow it down. But keep going there, Beth. You were on a roll and I interrupted, and please forgive me.
No, you're fine. Okay, so this is going to sound really basic, and it kind of applies to synthesis as well, but slightly differently. But read the provided info, because sometimes they'll tell you at the top, like, this is a speech from, I don't know, like an activist or something, or they might give you like an actual year or a person's name. And sometimes that really helps. And same for like synthesis. I know we're talking about multiple choice right now, but a lot of times I've noticed that sometimes students gloss over the provided info, and that info I think is there for a reason, and it takes just a couple seconds to look at it.
Yeah.
So it can be really helpful to know what you're about to read. And I think that tip applies for the ACT and SAT as well. Like if there's a sentence above the passage that tells you what it is that you're about to read that, because there's a really good chance it's there for a reason.
Okay. I'm going to answer one of the questions that showed up in the chat, by the way, and then I'm going to address what you said about the year. Someone says, are you going to be AP readers this summer, AP graders this summer? Beth, are you going to be an AP reader this summer?
I am, yes.
Okay. This summer, I am going to be a question leader. So that means that I oversee all of one of the questions, whichever one that I'm actually assigned. Now, are you a table leader this year, or just a reader again? And I don't mean just a reader. You know what I'm saying? Like
I'm just a lowly reader. No, this is my third year. This is only my third year being a reader, so I'm not a table leader yet. But like, and I guess it's kind of cool. I was a table leader at our state mock exam for the past 2 years, and that was super fun. So whenever the College Board needs me, I'm ready.
There we go. Right now, just so you know, I have no say in any of this nonsense, because otherwise, I'd be like, Beth, come on, like let's get you up there. But I do not work for the College Board. I am a consultant and only. Okay, so someone asked about effective commentary and essays. That's also in there. Please note that there are 4 review sessions. So this is really going to be about reading strategies and multiple choice and a little bit of reading in relation to rhetorical analysis. A lot of our writing review will happen in our next 3 sessions. So just tossing that out there because people have already been asking about the sophistication point and whatnot. I want to go back to one of your strategies here, Beth, about looking at the date in that italics information. What's really nice about that is sometimes an audience is given, but when that date is given of publication, for those of you that are history gurus, that should be like when you turn on your historical knowledge, when you're like, oh, heck yes. Because a lot of times the pieces that are popular that they take and put on the AP exam are going to deal with the issues of that time period. So if you're the type of person who loves history or is taking APUSH or any type of history, if you know what's going on contextually in the time periods of when that was written, you can apply that background knowledge and say, okay, this is from 1962 and it's political. That's right after the end of the Korean, well, actually the Korean War was 51 to 53, but we're starting right about the beginning of the Vietnam War because Vietnam was 61 to 75. And so now we're also looking at, where the civil rights movement fits in with that. And so you can know that there's a lot of political tensions beginning to and social tensions kind of growing in the United States. If you have that background knowledge, that's going to help you interpret that piece a little bit better and just being able to access that. So always look at that date. I really appreciate that, Beth, because we can trigger our historical knowledge, especially for those of us that really like history a bunch.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it just helps in general because it can also help you know a little bit about the speaker and who
absolutely.
That kind of thing. Sometimes I wish they'd give maybe a little bit more detail, but I feel like they give students what they need to know. And that can really help. And it's just a couple seconds to read that before you read the passage. But maybe we can move on and talk about what students should be doing as they read the passage. Because I have students ask all the time, should I be annotating? How much should I be annotating? Little things like that. So what are your thoughts on that as far as annotations? What do you have your students do?
Before I do annotations, let's go back to just one other thing that you said about process of elimination so that we can segue into marking up the text. And also somebody did ask, does the difficulty of the question affect its score? And I happen to know the answer to that. The answer is no. So every question is worth 1 point. But I didn't know if you knew, but I did. And so nonetheless, one thing that you mentioned about process of elimination was when the kids narrow it down to 2. Folks, whenever you narrow it down to 2, the lead distractor typically has one of these qualities. One of the qualities is that part of the answer is correct, but part of it is wrong. And what that is meant to do is that's meant to make you second guess your own reading capabilities. So you need to kind of approach the text with confidence and approach your answering with confidence as well. So you have to say, I might know that that part of the question's the answer is correct, but that part does not seem to be. Judge it in your mind. One of those two pieces will have the entire answer be correct. And if one of them is making you really question, go with the other one, because you've narrowed it down to two and one of them has something that you doubt. That's most likely the lead distractor. So that's one example of a lead distractor. Another example of a lead distractor is the answer is entirely correct. You know that you read that answer, but it's not correct for that question stem. That is a big deal, folks. That's one of the easiest ways that kids get led astray, because they're like, I can read that and I can point to the text where that shows up. And yet it's not what's actually answering that particular question stem. And the question stem just means what the question is actually asking. The last one is the lead distractor is often the more vague version of the correct answer in some way. And we want to have the most precise answer possible. So those are three things that you can look at when you narrow it down to two and you're like, which one do I take? Right? Just ask, is there any part of one of these answers that I should doubt? Is it a correct answer that doesn't match with my question stem? Or is this just a little bit too vague? All right, back to annotations.
Yes. So how much do your students actually annotate on the exam? Because I'm curious, because my students in the past have told me like what they do in class versus the exam is a little bit different. So what do your students do?
On exam day, my students don't annotate that much, to be honest with you. I would prefer if they annotated more, especially because I give them the easiest annotation method like I could possibly ever imagine. But they don't do it as much as I would like them to. And that's mostly because they don't practice on their own as much as I want them to. They'll practice in class when I force them. And then I'm like, hey, just go try this when you read this for your homework assignment. And it ain't happening. So that's just me being completely honest here. Now, with that being said, I want them to do it some more, but what about your kids?
Yeah, I don't think they annotate as much as maybe needed, but I think we try to do like kind of like what and why, like what's happening, why is it happening? Some of my students will actually read the questions first. And I know that's not what everybody does. I know it's not like everybody's approach, but for some of my students, it does help, particularly my students who feel like they like lose focus quickly, or they feel overwhelmed really quickly or easily. So it helps them kind of read with a purpose. But I have also had students be like, I cannot do that. I need to just read the passage and then look at the questions. But that is something that if you feel like you're struggling with like focus, or you feel like you're overwhelmed, you can actually take like SAT passages, ACT passages, or other like similar multiple choice and try that first. Like try reading the questions first, because that might help. And my students who do that, they kind of annotate in a particular way. They kind of mark off like whatever lines or there's a question about, or paragraphs that there's questions about, and that kind of helps draw their focus and be more strategic. So that's like part of their annotations if they use that method.
For my students, one of the things that I make them do when they read, and this is something that you all want to consider doing on test day, but it's also something that you want to consider doing starting in your classroom right now, because this is going to really help you. In a few minutes, I'll pull up some sample multiple choice questions, particularly for the rhetorical analysis kind of reading. We talk about the writing ones after. And we'll just try to consider, hey, what do these actually ask us to look for? Because they are actually all kind of the same. They're all looking for the same types of skills. But the first way that I get my kids to read is besides approaching the text with confidence. So even if my students are like, I'm really struggling getting through this piece, I don't care. I'm like, you know something. And even if you don't know half the words, if you know the other half, focus on what you do know, not what you don't. But the first way that I get my students to annotate is while they read, and this is super simple, is to just put lines in where they see any type of transition. Any transition at all. It could be a transition of images. It could be a new definition. It could be a transition from one example to another example. Now, they both might be proving a point, but we're still transitioning examples. And it's important that my kids just draw that little line. And the reason why is because when they notice breaks, chances are they're going to actually see questions about those particular breaks. And I know that because I write multiple choice questions. And I'm always like, okay, where do I see a shift? Because that shift has a purpose. And now I need to actually write a question about that shift in the purpose here. So as you're looking, if you look for this idea of structure, you can then start asking yourself some other questions. And I'm going to give you all a checklist of what you can do while you read in just a few minutes. But that's the first thing that I tell my kids. And it's the simplest thing to do on test day. Just draw lines when you see a shift. What other advice do you have there, Beth?
Yeah, I think the shift helps too. Like whenever kids see words like yet or but or however or any of those, that can be really helpful. And that goes for not just multiple choice, but even rhetorical analysis. And I think as far as like word choice, this is something that we've talked about in my classes recently. Because my students are like, what if they give us something like really old? Like, what if it's from like the 1700s and we don't understand it and that kind of thing? And so we've talked about how, yes, it's likely that there's going to be some kind of vocab question, maybe one or two. What does this word mean? But for the most part, if you don't understand a word, let's say you encounter a word and you don't know what it means, chances are, unless they're asking what does that word mean, you don't really need to know it. So keep going there, or like there might be a context clue, but I think sometimes we get too wrapped up, like you were saying before, in what we don't know. Whereas like if you get the gist of it, you're probably okay. And if it's a really like, I don't know, like a really complex passage, sometimes really old passages feel like a wall of text. Like I swear, like people did not know how to indent properly like back 200 or whatever years ago. So I'll have my students like come to like a breathing point where they could just kind of like pause and like write a note about what they've read, kind of like what's the main idea, because that can be really intimidating if you feel like you're not understanding. But if you kind of check your comprehension as you go in like shorter intervals, chances are you actually understand more than you realize. And that can help you feel more confident as you actually go to answer those multiple choice questions.
Right, because a lot of these readings aren't necessarily the most exciting that you're going to ever get in your life. When it comes to what you had mentioned about not knowing some of the words, right? And what I have my students do is I do tell them, if you get a word that you don't know, I do ask my students to circle it. And I say, I want you to just quickly, like while you're reading, draw arrows to context clues that might help you figure it out. Now, folks, when you get to a word that you don't know, Coach Hall is right. You're most likely not going to see a vocab question. If you do, it's going to say in context, this word most likely means. But if, you know, and like I said, most likely you're not going to get that. If anything, you'll see 2 questions like that on the test. At the very minimum, you can ask yourself, although I don't know what this word means, and maybe I can't figure out its definition from the context, you can most likely tell if the word has a positive or negative connotation. And that's really important, because if you can at least pinpoint that that word has a positive or negative connotation, you can actually get the author's tone, which will help convey the overall attitude towards what you do know. Okay, folks? So that's something that I really want you to consider doing. So you're reading and you're saying, okay, I'm going to mark every shift where I see one, where I actually think there's a transition here. And that doesn't just mean in every paragraph. It can be, you know, like I said, from one example to the next or anything like that, or a shift from, you know, providing an example to actually explaining the example, a shift from narrating to now explaining, anything like that. But then you go in and you say, okay, is this word that I can't figure out positive or negative? And that's going to help you understand the overall purpose. It's going to give you another tool to help do that. I got an entire other set of tips here though, Beth, but what else do you have for us?
Honestly, I think that's kind of all my general tips for just getting started with multiple choice.
Okay, then if you don't mind, I am going to share a particular window right now. And it's right here. These are some multiple choice tips for me. And can you see that there, Beth?
Yes, I can see it on the Zoom, so it's a little delayed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I knew that. I knew it would be delayed on YouTube, but that's okay. But folks, here is what I would encourage you to do on test day. Okay. So first of all, oops, let me zoom out here a little bit. The first thing that I want to encourage you to do is to confidently approach the piece. I already said that. We're going to move in here. Okay. And you want to practice this before test day as well, folks. You want to go into test day in May knowing how to read, but you have to practice reading. And I actually encourage you to pick out things that you like to read that are nonfiction. If you love sports, then go to ESPN.com and read their articles, or Sports Illustrated. I don't care what you're reading that's nonfiction, just read some nonfiction here, folks, and practice this, okay? So go in with some confidence. The first thing that I want you to do, like I've already mentioned, is to mark lines anywhere you see a shift or transition, because chances are you're getting a question about that. Okay. And I have a little note here that, you know, these are not just limited to paragraph breaks. I already said that. I also talked about circling any seemingly important words that you don't know and try to draw arrows to context clues that can help you figure it out while you read. Okay. These context clues will either help you define the word or at least let you know if it's positive or negative. I just said that. Okay. Now, folks, here we go. If you can find the author's tone, you want to mark it. If there's a negative tone, you want to say, okay, the author seems rather critical here, or at least negative. If the author then changes that tone to something more positive, you want to say, okay, there's a shift towards positivity here. That's going to show us where the complexity is in the reading. That doesn't always happen. It might just be the same tone the whole time, okay? An inquisitive tone or something like that. No problem. But if you can mark the tone, you want to do it. Now, some of you all might be like, I actually kind of really struggle with reading. That's okay. A lot of my students struggle with reading. When I was in high school, I struggled with reading because I didn't love to read when I was in high school. Now I love it. But here's what's up. The best way to figure out how to read and read well and comprehend is to find the verb in the sentence that you're reading that you can't comprehend and just say who or what is completing that verb. Just finding who or what is doing that verb, that is what you need to know in the sentence. Everything else adds meaning, but the verb and the subject create the meaning. So if you struggle with reading comprehension, that is the number one thing you need to practice from now until May, is to say, where is the verb in the sentence? Where is that action word or the linking verb, which is just like is, was, am, and are. And you say, all right, who or what is, or let's say the action verb was punching. We would say who or what is punching. And then because of that, whatever word answers that question is the subject. If you can do that, your comprehension will start going through the roof, but you got to practice before May. The last thing that I really need you thinking about is this. While you read, you want to always ask yourself, when you break that text into sections, ask yourself this. In this section of the text, can I infer something about the speaker? If the answer is no, you go to the next question. Can I infer something about the audience? If the answer is no, say, can I infer something about the speaker's argument here? If the answer is no, you then say, what can I infer about what the intended audience should experience emotionally? And because of that, what you're doing is you're actually dealing with parts of the rhetorical situation. And the truth is that that's what you're being quizzed on with your rhetorical analysis multiple choice. They're going to ask you questions about argument structure and rhetorical situation. And that's why I say mark the parts of the argument as you see transitions, because that's what you're going to get questions on. And we'll look at a couple of those in just a few minutes. What's up, Beth?
Just a quick reminder to students in the chat, please keep it respectful or you're going to be muted and blocked, because some of the comments right now from one particular individual are not helpful to rhetorical analysis or multiple choice conversations.
Okay, I don't have a chat on my page right now. When I get that up, we can take care of that. But for some reason, my chat's not working. Why is that? Come on.
But that's okay. Whatever you were going over was excellent advice for students. I just want to make sure that the chat does not get carried away.
Got it. No, I do appreciate that. For some reason, I can't get my chat to work in my page right now. I don't like that. Why is that? Let me see what happens if I refresh it. Okay, good. So we've got a bunch of multiple choice strategies out there. Now, what do we want to do here, Beth, as we think about reading? What's going on? Any other reading elements before I bring up the course and exam description and we start looking at the types of questions that we can see?
I think it would be good to look at some of these questions because a lot of the question stems that we're going to see are very similar, even though the passage changes. So I think it would be helpful to show that if you understand the question being asked and you can apply some of these tips, you can increase your accuracy. And then obviously that is hopefully going to yield a higher score.
Okay. Yep. Good. Come on. All right. Let me pull up these. We'll share this in just a moment once I get there. I had it up and then I lost it. Where is it? Oh, man. I got to rotate my pages too. The struggle is real sometimes when you're old working with technology. All right. Here we go. Put this here. Get this here. And we'll shrink that. I've got so many things open. That's the problem right now. Oh, good grief.
Are you one of those people that has like 100 tabs open at once?
I have probably like 5,000 tabs open right now. All right, here we go. Let's share up the screen again, and then we'll be able to talk about it. Share up the screen. Let's look at some sample questions. Okay, good. You should be able to see sample questions right here, correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, why don't you talk about this kind of bold-faced language right here where it says questions 1 through 8 right underneath it? Because this was your first tip, reading this. What is the importance of reading this? And we're not going to read the passage itself, but what's the importance of reading this bold-faced element? What are the things that we can glean according to Beth Hall there that's so important?
So it says the following passage is an excerpt from a speech delivered by a leading women's rights activist in 1913. So excerpt means it's not the full speech. That could be pretty helpful to know. And then we have leading women's rights activist and 1913. So that would tell me if I were a student, hey, this is before women had the right to vote because that happened in 1920. So if this is an American-based passage, then that could be important. Now, I happen to know who the speaker is and more. I wish they had actually told us who the speaker is and what convention the person was at. But at the very least, we know that it could be tied to women's suffrage because of the time period.
Absolutely. I was thinking the same thing. And this is where we just want to allow our historical knowledge to be activated. And it doesn't mean that this is going to confirm that for us, but it does allow us to kind of get that, spidey sense tingle in here and to say, hey, this is going to be something that I will most likely deal with. Now, who is the speaker for this?
I don't know if it's Emmeline or Emmeline, but Emmeline Pankhurst, she's actually a British women's rights activist, and she was speaking in Connecticut. But I had my students research her. If you have the Language of Composition textbook, 3rd edition, this is in there, by the way. But she actually was arrested something like 12 times, and she would get out of jail by like essentially going on like a hunger strike. So they would just let her go and stuff like that. So she was very militant with her beliefs. Let's put it that way.
Gotcha. All right. So we have that. And do you know what conference it was too?
It was, I don't know the exact name of it, but I know it was like one of the like women's suffrage conventions in Hartford.
Okay. Now, just so everybody knows, these questions are taken from the course and exam description. I'll actually put a link to that right in the chat. This is publicly released College Board materials. So I want to make sure that that is down there and that you all are well aware of that. So this is publicly released. That's why we're using it here. But these were some of the sample questions. Now, what I had mentioned before in my when I gave those tips that I put up on the screen about, hey, things that you want to read for. One of the things that you want to read for is the elements of the rhetorical situation. And the questions that I put at the bottom really focused on the speaker and the audience. But context and exigence are also part of the rhetorical situation. Beth, before I talk about this particular question, can you give us a rundown on context and exigence? Because I think that a lot of times students and especially even new teachers that I work with are unclear about what the difference between those are.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're familiar with the acronym SPACE or like Space Cat, context and exigence are in that one. If you are on Team Soapstone, then the O for occasion is essentially the combination of context and exigence. So I think of context as like the historical context. So what's happening before that or during that time period in history that's relevant. And you can even technically look at like the future context as well. I kind of think of it like a historical timeline. And then the exigence is like the catalyst or like the impetus. It's like the immediate reason why the person is speaking. So it's like a much smaller thing, whereas context is much more broad.
Yeah. One of the ways that I use a visual for my students is I tell them to picture the gray clouds in the wind as the context. It's that bigger picture, like something is coming, but you don't know what. And then all of a sudden, when the lightning strikes the tree in front of your house and inspires you to go on this quest to create life out of cadavers, that is the exigence for that moment. And I'm just talking about Frankenstein, Beth, that's all. But nonetheless, there's a lot of what's going on in the bigger picture. And then the exigence is that moment, like what inspired this to actually be spoken about. And you'll notice that in this first question right here, this first question is, which of the following best describes the writer's exigence? Boom. If you're reading everything and you think about the rhetorical situation, you should be saying to yourself, what's going on in the background here? And then what is this writer actually responding to? And it's going to be right in this type of a question. This question will show up, or something similar will show up on your AP exam. I can almost guarantee it. And the reason why is because when you're asked for the rhetorical analysis comprehension, you're asked questions about methods of development, argument function, and rhetorical situation. Those are the three things that you're most accountable for. And so because of that, that's where you're going to want to do most of your annotating and whatnot. So we can see right here, exigence is right here. Now we also have in the opening paragraph, the writer contrasts a hypothetical rhetorical situation with her own primarily too. What's important for us to kind of consider here? I know that we're not reading the passage and we're not answering this correctly, but what's some language in here that can help us? How can we know how we can practice reading before test day here?
Yeah, so I think it's important to recognize that a lot of times they're going to ask a question about the opening paragraph. It just seems like they like to do that anyway. And so I would want students to like zero in on words like contrast. So we know that that is like a strong verb. And I like, because it's in the question, even if you were reading the passage and kind of struggling to figure out what was happening, well, because of the question, we know there's some kind of contrast in here. So I think that helps. And then the word hypothetical, I think most students probably know what that means. Now, rhetorical situation, as a teacher, I say that quite a lot in class, but maybe not everyone does. But just to kind of clarify, because we've said it a few times in this live, but the rhetorical situation is basically like the situation from which the text arises. So it's this kind of like combination of the speaker, the audience, the purpose, the message, context, exigence. It's kind of like a puzzle and all these components fit together. So I think it's important for like looking at this, at least students should know the word exigence and rhetorical situation, just because that would make answering the questions a little bit easier. But even if you didn't know that, contrast and hypothetical would help us to at least narrow down what we're supposed to be thinking about as we look at that paragraph.
Right. And I actually really appreciate this word contrast. And the reason why is because if you're considering practicing reading and trying to build your reading skills and you're thinking about shifts, right? If you notice that there is a shift from one idea that's hypothetical to something that is more concrete, then we're going to really be in decent shape, because you would have already marked a line right there. And you're like, oh, why did I mark that line? What was that shift? And you're like, oh, that shift was a contrast. Oh, all right. And so that's why I have my kids mark this kind of stuff. I actually have my kids annotate for methods of development, which are just ways that people communicate: narration, description, exemplification, compare and contrast, definition, problem solution, classification and division. I'm missing two more and I can't remember off the top of my head. But what I do is I have.
Did you say
what was that?
Isn't process one, or did you say
process analysis? That's one of them. Process analysis, and I can't remember the other one off the top of my head right quick. But my point is that when my students annotate, if they can actually find a contrast or a comparison, I actually want them to just write CON or COMP on the side. And a lot of times these questions, you'll notice, actually relate directly to that. So if you're thinking about how people think, then sure enough, it's like, oh, I already marked the contrast right here. And they're asking a question about it. So you'll actually be that much more engaged with the reading to answer it correctly. On top of that, this is an opening paragraph, and opening paragraphs are typically meant to engage the audience in some way. So you can always kind of say, in what way would this actually work to engage with the topic at hand and project the argument forward? And so these are the kind of things that we can know going in that are going to make test day a bit easier if you practice with this stuff in mind.
Absolutely. And then also, just as a quick note, because like we're talking about the answer choices before and like the word choice, you'll notice that like the questions there, we've got like illustrate, explain, emphasize, suggest, highlight. So those kind of all mean very similar things. So I would focus more on like the rest of it as well. But like for this particular question, because I've had students work with these, I'm trying to think of which two answer choices it was, but there was one where it's like she talks about that whatever's in the answer choice, but not in the opening paragraph. And like, so like you were talking before about distractors, like she might reference one of these answer choices, at some point. But like, if it's not happening in the opening paragraph, then that's not going to be our answer.
Right, because we're looking at lines 1 through 10, and we're actually looking within that paragraph. It says the writer contrasts the hypothetical rhetorical situation with her own. So this actually keeps us in that paragraph. Absolutely. And now let's actually shift down to numbers 3 and 4, because these questions all really interrelate. It says in the second paragraph, which of the following best characterizes the writer's position on the relevance of her topic for American women? Well, we have to know the writer's position. Now, I bring this up because let's look at question 4. It says in context lines 11 through 23. So we're in that same section. It says it could be used to support which of the following claims about the writer's tone. If I can know the writer's position, I better know the writer's tone. And would you give us a little rundown about tone here, though, Beth, just for anybody who is like, maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't know tone as well as I probably should.
Okay, so tone, the way I was taught tone, at least, is like the writer's attitude toward the subject. So first of all, we have to figure out what is this particular passage about. And that's a good tip, I think, if you're really struggling with your passage comprehension anyway. Let's say you're reading it and you're like, I don't even know where to start. Step 1, what is the passage actually about? Because then we know like what the speaker's attitude is. And like you were saying before, it can be as simple as like positive or negative. Like if we're really struggling, that could be a potential starting point. But we really just want to think about, in this case, like if she's talking about American women and like voting rights and things like that, like how does she feel about that topic? And that can help. Something with tone, though, that I think has come up a few times with my own students is if you look at the words here, so we've got patronizing, ingratiating, bold and forthright, reverent and admiring, and then detached and impersonal. So if you're really struggling with tone, I would say this is a really good one for a process of elimination, because a lot of my students don't know what ingratiating means off the top of their head. And I have seen that one come up a few times in other multiple choice questions, not saying it's the right answer, but if you looked at that and you didn't know what ingratiating is, okay, just ignore it for a second and go through all the other answer choices and kind of use that. But that is a tone word that I think could be helpful. But like bold and forthright, is she being bold? Well, if the answer is yes, then let's not eliminate it. But if she's not being bold, then we cross that one out. And so whenever they have like 2 words here, like reverent and admiring, if she's not being admiring, it doesn't matter if she's reverent. If it's not an admiring tone, then it's not the right answer. So I think that can be helpful as well. I think tone questions like this, if you're stuck, process of elimination can really help.
Oh, absolutely. That is a great point. And, we just want to make sure that people know that when we discuss tone, we're talking about the speaker's attitude towards that subject. So you were right. It's really important. What is the piece about? Okay. What is the speaker's attitude towards that? And you will notice, though, that this is a claim about the writer's tone in a particular section. So there might be a writer's attitude throughout the whole piece that's projected, but maybe within one piece, the tone is actually changing a little bit. And that's one of those reasons why I asked my kids to find shifts. Because let's say they were reading and they noticed, oh, there's a little tone shift right here. It was mostly negative. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey, pretty positive here. And then goes back to being negative. Then at that point, it's like, oh, I already marked that tone shift right here because I put my little lines right there. And that might be able to help if that's the case. And like I said, Beth and I aren't trying to answer these questions for you all. That's why we didn't read this passage. We're just saying if we look at stems, what are things that we can do and think about when we look at answers for this type of stuff, for our multiple choice questions here. And what I'd like to point out here too is this is just, hey, this could be used to support which of the following claims. Well, this is basically saying, can you identify her claim for this section and the evidence that would go with it, that would support it. So we're just talking about argumentative function. So these questions are worded all funky, but really it's, do you know what this part of the sentence, part of the reading is doing in the argument as a whole? And there's only 6 things that a section of text will do. Okay. A section of text will do any of these following 6 movements. You have to figure it out. The first one is engage. So is this section of text trying to purposefully engage the audience with the topic? Just ask yourself that question. If not, then it's one of the next 5. The next one is, to contextualize. Is this section of text trying to contextualize, why we're talking about or why the speaker is talking about something? After the contextualization, it is this part of the text that is going to more clearly articulate the writer's position. If it's not doing that, then it's supporting the writer's position. If it's not doing that, then it's most likely addressing a counter argument. And if it's not addressing a counter argument, it's projecting why any of this matters in the world as we go forward. Those are the 6 functions of every part of an argument. And so, those are the 6 functions that any part of an argument can have. And so if you just ask your question because you know those, you'll be able to get something like this. You'll be able to say, oh yeah, okay, if the claim is this, this would actually support that. And then you can answer that question pretty easily.
Yeah, we had a question in the chat about like what words you need to know for multiple choice questions. So I think this is based of earlier where I had said something about how like if students don't know what exigence or rhetorical situation mean, the questions could be harder. And we had said like ingratiating is a tone word that sometimes comes up. One thing that I'm going to have my students do more next year is like when we do multiple choice practice, I'm going to have them like create some kind of document, I guess, where like they write down words that they need to know. But I would say, yeah, exigence, rhetorical situation, any of these tone words, if they're unfamiliar. Another one that comes up sometimes is the word underscore, because it means to emphasize. But I've had students think it like because they saw like underscore, I think they were thinking like undermine or something instead. So underscore means emphasize, kind of like you're underlining something. So I don't know, are there any other words that, colloquial is one that
shows up all the time. Yes. Colloquial is one that does show up consistently. And that just means used in common speech, folks, right? Like just in general conversation. It's not esoteric. It's not jargon. It's not anything fancy. It's just colloquial tone. It's what you would talk like in everyday language. That's a great one, Beth. I see it every year, and I warn my kids about it every year, except for right now. The other thing that I wanted to point out, though, about that question is I think that, too, the question might have been tied to rhetorical devices, because there used to be a lot of device questions that kids still get a lot of practice with. And the truth is there are only a few rhetorical vocabulary words that are going to be on your exam. First of all, anything that's seen in the rhetorical situation is something you need to know. Context, exigence, speaker, audience, purpose, message. I think I got it all. Okay. And then the other word that you'll need to know are metaphor, simile, and allusion. I think those are the only actual rhetorical devices that are listed, that are listed in the course and exam description. You will not see the words ethos, pathos, or logos on your exam, but you might see them as adjectives. So you might see the word pathetic show up, which just means emotional. You might see ethical show up, which means pertaining to character, or you might see logical show up, but you will not see ethos, pathos, or logos, or pathos, if that's what you'd like to say. All right. And Beth, I really appreciate too that you brought up like ingratiating and patronizing, right? Because a lot of times, folks, you can try to use what you know from other Romantic languages or other Germanic languages, but we've got this word patron right here with the beginning patri, right, which relates to patriarch. So we see those kind of common roots there, and that might help you figure those kind of things out. And so just tossing that out there. Now, let's actually talk a little bit while we have a little bit of time, Beth, about these writing questions and just some ways that you get your kids to approach the writing questions that are different than the reading questions, because they are a little bit different.
Yeah, so the writing questions are basically like you're being an editor. So you're going to see at the top, it'll say something like, this is a draft. And I think that's important because unlike the reading questions where it is going to be maybe like a speech or an excerpt of a longer work of nonfiction or something like that, these are a draft. I find them a little bit more interesting topic-wise, personally. They're shorter passages. There are fewer questions. So there's going to be 3 of these. So we have 2 reading passages and 3 writing passages. And the questions are different. The questions are different because we're going to be focusing on combining sentences or transitions, possibly logical order. So these are, I think, for many students, a little bit more familiar, a little bit more comfortable as well. And so what I have my students do is we do a mock exam. I use one of the ones from AP Classroom for the teachers here that might be curious. And I have them, once they've answered it, we look at how they did accuracy wise for their reading section and then the writing questions. And we kind of see, and some of my students have said in the past, like, oh, my rating accuracy is really good, but I ran out of time. And so these are things that I think students need to know about themselves, because I've had a couple of students use that information, and then the next time we did a test in AP Classroom, they realized that, you know, I was lingering too long on the reading, and maybe that's not my strong suit, but I'm actually pretty good at writing, and that can help my score. A lot of my students at least find the writing questions more approachable, or at the very least less stressful.
Yeah, I think that they're less stressful too, because a lot of times the vocabulary isn't going to be as robust as you hardly ever see ingratiating and patronizing. And if you do, you typically see it in the writing. So there are enough context clues for you to kind of figure out what those mean. And so I agree with that. One of the tips that I want to give you all, though, about these writing questions is this. You want to make sure that you know your grammar, okay? There are a couple things about grammar that you want to know. Now, you will not be asked grammar questions for the sake of knowing grammar. You will be asked grammatical questions that relate to a rhetorical purpose for the grammar. So let me make that very clear. It's not, you know, where does a comma go? It's actually asking a question. So, but if you know grammar, it's going to help you. For example, you need to know the difference between subordination and coordination. Coordination makes ideas equal. When I say I like Tim Freitas and Beth Hall, that means that I like both of them equally. But when I say, although I like Tim, I like Beth more, I have what's called a dependent clause there. That's the although I like Tim, because it might be true, but what I want to give more value to is the fact that I like Beth more. Okay. And so because of that, you really need to think about learning these grammatical moments here. And if you don't know them, you want to look them up: coordination and subordination. Now, the reason why this is so important is I'm going to show you with one of these questions. Let me see if I can find it. Let's see. Here we go. Question number 13. Now, I know we didn't read the piece here, but it says in sentence 9, reproduced below, the writer wants to provide a convincing explanation for why switching to the metric system would benefit the United States industries. Which of the following underlined text best accomplishes this goal? So notice here it says switching to the metric system would also benefit the United States industries. The European Union, for example, has been requiring its member states to standardize their metric systems since 1971. Now, if you look at the question here, it says the writer wants to provide a convincing explanation. And we have the first part of the sentence: switching to the metric system would also benefit the United States industries. Folks, this writer is going to clarify what the benefits will be. If you know how this sentence should be punctuated, well, what punctuation do I need to make sure that I clarify something on the other side from the left-hand side of the page? That's a colon, right? So a colon is meant, when you use a colon correctly, you're going to put information on the other side of the colon that clarifies what comes before. A clock is the easiest way to show that. Right now, it's 7:56. It's the 7th hour of the night, but more specifically, colon, it's the 56th minute. It clarifies where we are in the middle of that 7th hour on the East Coast. So now I bring this up here, folks, because if you know punctuation and you know it has to be a colon, you can narrow this down to B and D right away. Absolutely. And you're like, oh, hey, I don't even need to look at C or E or A, because the semicolon is not the correct piece of punctuation to actually provide the convincing explanation that clarifies the benefits here. So you want to know how to use advanced punctuation and the rhetorical purposes for them. And Beth, I think that you actually recently did some good punctuation videos, correct? I'm gonna have to
Yes.
jump on that bandwagon.
Absolutely. I have a few videos on my channel that are pretty recent for like colons, dashes, and semicolons. I had initially created them with the intention for students studying for like the SAT or ACT, but it does apply exactly to what you're saying.
Yeah. Toby asked a great question here. I actually don't know about this because my kids are going to take it on paper, but it says any specific helpful hints about taking this section digitally as opposed to on pen and paper. Are your kids taking it on pen and paper or are they taking it digitally?
My kids are doing pen and paper.
Okay, yeah, mine are too. I will say this, Toby, right? They do have annotation tools that they let kids practice with before the exam. I think that they do. I'm pretty sure they do. They did, especially when they released annotation tools the first time. Try to get your hands on those. That's the best tip that I can give you. I would still have my kids annotate the same way. Hey, put little markers in where they transition, write in the note, like in the margins, just type in a quick little note if you see anything in relation to the rhetorical situation. And then if you can answer any of these questions, what can I infer about A, B, C, or D? I'd still have them do it the same way. I would just make them do it with the annotation tools. And I think that the College Board does release those. So just a heads up for that, to keep a lookout or to even ask for that. I'm not the College Board. This whole thing today is not endorsed by the College Board. That's why it says unofficial and whatnot. But those are the kind of things that I would consider for such things. Beth, let me ask you one other question here, though, before I make one more point about these. What happens when I can narrow down two answers and I'm like, well, they both sound right? And then I think it's kind of a subjective answer. What would you tell your students if they were like, come on, these both could possibly work, but one of them is the right answer?
I think it kind of depends on like which question type it is, but we want to look for like the nuances of the word choice in general, I think. Like, so kind of like, why are they different or how are they different? And that could usually be helpful as well. So maybe we could like look at a specific question and kind of talk through it perhaps.
Hold on 1 second. I just lost my screen. Where am I? Come on. Oh, there we are. Okay, there we are. Okay. So I didn't have a question in mind because I wasn't thinking about this particular issue here. Oh, you know what? Here, let's actually look at this one. Well, actually, I can't even say that one will work. Beth, I wish I had a question in mind for that. Maybe we'll have one prepared for next time that's like that.
Well, we can maybe like, okay, so my students, let's go up to, there was one where it's like, where should the sentence be placed? This might not be an answer to, I think you passed it. My students hate this type of question. There.
Oh, here we go. Yeah. Right.
My students hate these. This might not be, this is one where they're kind of like, sometimes they're like, oh, well, okay. It could be here. It could be here. So, and these kind of take a while depending on your approach to this. So one thing to keep in mind is we want to think about like how the passage or the paragraph, whatever we're talking about, is organized, because usually there's some sort of like context clue. So for instance, for this particular question, it says, this means that the United States must convert. Okay, so I need to figure out what the this is, because this must be referring to something. And then that's going to help me eliminate some of these answer choices.
Perfect. Yes, that's perfect. And what I was going to say about this for my tip, and I appreciate you finding this question, Beth, because that's absolutely perfect. They do have something that is going to link in terms of line of reasoning in these sentences. And, you know, Beth, that's a great point. It's just figuring out the antecedent for this, because that is going to tell us where it needs to go. What I was also going to say is the following. When you answer these questions are meant to be rhetorical in nature. Not does it sound right? It's does it fit here? Those are two very different questions. Sorry, not does it fit here? Does it function here? Okay. And part of figuring that out is saying, okay, what can I find in here that is unclear, that is clarified by the sentence that comes before or after, to know that this is the perfect fit for it, because it's actually where the function is. These are not meant to be subjective. They are meant to actually be purposeful in maintaining lines of reasoning. I'm going to make one more point here, Beth, and then we'll begin to close off. I'm going to talk about my ultimate review packet in just a minute too. But one of the things about these questions is as follows. When it comes to the reading multiple choice, like I said, I tell my kids that they have to know argument structure, or argument function, and methods of development. And the truth is that can actually help you with these types of questions too. Because I had said that arguments, one of the first things that an argument will do is it will engage a reader. Look at this first question. Which of the following sentences, if placed before sentence 1, would capture the audience's interest and provide the most effective introduction to the topic. Well, there you go. What do arguments do? They engage readers. And if you know that, then you can now say, what's the most engaging element here that I would want to read if I were trying to get someone involved into this? Also, if you look down here, we have the writer wants to set up a comparison, and a comparison is a method of development. It's compare and contrast. Interestingly enough, there's only one word in here that relates to actual comparison. It's right here. So you really want to make sure that you're able to look for these elements of those methods of development and those elements of argument function, because if you can read like that, when you have to do these kind of read like a writer questions, you can actually apply those to these read like a writer questions as well. And so that should help you out a decent amount. Now, I'm going to pull this up and let's see, we'll stop sharing the screen for just a moment. And Beth, anything else you want to say about reading strategies? And then next time we get together, we will talk about the rhetorical analysis essay. And of course, we will certainly talk about the sophistication point, because everybody wants to talk about that. Although there are 5 other points that are way easier to get that I think we should want to talk about, but we will talk about it. What do you have for things? And then I'll talk about my ultimate review packet to help kids review as well. And then we'll sign off for today.
Okay, so I just want to give like a quick pep talk instead of actual advice. And that is
That's
this.
it.
If you are struggling on test day, please know that there could be easier questions coming, number one, so we don't linger on hard questions. But also, if it's difficult for you, it's probably difficult for everybody. So don't get all like doomsday-ish in your head and be like, oh, I failed. Because remember what Tim said earlier, you really don't need to answer that many correct. And I'm not saying like, oh, don't try. But what I'm saying is like, you don't know what your score is going to be. So keep going. Because so many times I've seen students get kind of like, at least in practice tests in school, not the real test, because obviously we can't be in the room. But I've seen kids get really frustrated with like the first passage. But like, what if the first passage is as hard as it gets? Like, don't let that set the tone for your whole testing experience. And like, really think about, if it's hard, what tips do I remember? Oh, I know I can use process of elimination, or, oh, I need to look at the nuances of the word choice. And that can be really helpful too. So thinking about these test taking strategies to prevent like feelings of overwhelm and anxiety, or at least like limit that, can be really helpful. So I think that's kind of like the advice I want to leave people with, is like, don't stress out about one particular passage or question, because it's a small portion of the 45 questions and it's a small portion of your composite score in general.
That is absolutely fabulous. That is advice, Beth, and it's really good advice, and I appreciate it. Go in there with some confidence, especially because if you're here, you're most likely caring about this kind of stuff as well. Now, folks, please note, Beth and I always want to provide as many free study resources as we can, but there are sometimes when we invest a lot more of our time into things. And I'm about to share my screen right now to show you something that I invested a significant amount of time in. But I want to just show you what it entails so that you know that this is a resource for you. I'm going to put it in the chat. No one is obligated to get this, but I want to make sure that you are all aware that it is out there. This is the Garden of English Ultimate Review Packet. I just put a link to it in the chat. You'll see it up on the screen. I thought you would. Let's see here. Beth, can you see that on the screen? My ugly face right there?
Yes. Yep. It's playing.
Okay, gotcha.
Or it's there.
All right, got it. What this is here, folks, is this is just an entire set of review of units 1 through 9 based on all of the content that you need. And in each one of these, what you'll see is that there are videos in here that go over the content that show up in the course and exam description. And every video has notes guides for you, so you can follow along and you can answer questions and practice things as I go through the video. On top of that, I do provide the answers for you here as well. And so where these answers are, you can go and check, hey, how well did I do when I was doing those activities? And I've got multiple videos for the first 4 units, and then the last 5 units, I don't need as many videos. I can cover the content more quickly, but you'll always have activities and readings that you can do. On top of that, at the end of each unit, there are 2 sets of practice multiple choice questions with rationales. The first, and these practice multiple choice questions, there are 5 rhetorical analysis type questions, and there are 5 writing type questions. And these also come with rationales for you. But on top of that, they only test you on the content from unit 1 of the content that was covered in these videos, and the content that was covered in unit 1 of the AP Lang course and exam description. On top of that, you don't just get 10 multiple choice questions, you actually have 20. And the reason why is because we also have a US history version. So this comes from what we did was we matched the 9 units of the AP Lang course and exam description with the units of the AP US history. And so now with unit 1, I picked a document from 1491 to 1607 because that's the unit 1 of AP US history. And I picked a document from there and wrote 5 multiple choice questions, rhetorical analysis type ones. And then I actually had my students who were in AP US history last year that scored very well on their exams write LEQs and DBQs as the drafts. But the LEQ here is in response to this particular time period. So if you were to actually go into unit 2 and you're trying to practice your multiple choice as well, you'll have your generic multiple choice, which is just some, I picked this out and then I wrote these questions. And then we have this particular passage, but then we have the US history that coincides with with unit 2 of a push. Now, these are not a push multiple choice questions, but they coincide with that. Also included in here are 2 practice exams that you can actually self-score yourself. I have everything you could imagine to self-score this, from your practice exam to multiple choice answers to rubrics that you can turn into asking yourself questions so you can know how you did. I also have student samples and commentaries where my students wrote examples for you, and then I rewrote them as lower scores each time, and I provided scoring commentaries for you. And you can actually convert your score and have a guess on hey, how would I score on my AP exam? And I have 2 of those. And one of my practice exams is actually also US history based. So that's a total of 90 multiple choice questions, 2 practice exams, which will bring up actually more than that. This is 180 multiple choice questions, and then 2 practice exams on top of that. And there are videos in here that go over the content of the course and exam description. And that took well over 1,000 hours to create and film and produce for you all. But that is here. I linked that up right in the description for those of you that are like, hey, I want to study a little bit more. On top of that, you can pinpoint what you need for study. If you're like, no, I'm cool with units 1 and 2, then don't do units 1 and 2. Go focus on units 3, 4, 5, and 6, because I do talk about what's in there. All right. Any other questions, comments in our fashion tips, Beth, before we sign off here for today?
I think we caught up with everything that's in the chat at least. And so if you all found this helpful, we are going to be doing 3 more of these. Next time, like Tim said, we'll be talking about sophistication, rhetorical analysis, and we will be going live. The 4th one is like the night before the exam as well. So if you have questions that night, that one's always kind of fun for us because it's kind of like just all these like last minute student questions. But
it's a whirlwind every time.
It is. It's like Tim and I can probably tell you the top 10 questions that will be asked already that night. But just as a reminder, both of us have YouTube channels and have like 4 years of content as well. Though I think our newest content, both of us, is probably better. But if there's stuff where you're like, oh, well, I had asked in the chat about commentary and they never really got to it, just go into your like YouTube or search bar in general and just be like Coach Hallwrites commentary or Garden of English commentary. And those videos will pop up as well in case you need additional tips between now and then. But we so appreciate y'all coming to this and asking questions and engaging in the chat. It's really fun for us to do this. So we hope it was valuable to you as well.
Right. And don't forget, next time we will be much more specific with actually talking about rhetorical analysis and ways to help with that in the commentary. I really appreciate you, Beth. I really appreciate your time. And I'm thrilled to continue to work on more projects with you.
Yes. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great night.
You too. Bye.
Bye.